Nikhil is an amateur college athlete. He started strength training at the college gym. He seeks your advice. As a coach, trainer, therapist, having basic idea about the foundational concepts of strength training, you explained in the program. How would you periodize the strength training program considering he's a college level athlete? What all factors you would consider in designing such a program? So if you're looking for answers to these questions, you're in the right place. Welcome to this course offered by NPTEL on physical medicine and rehabilitation in sports. Welcome to today's lecture on periodization in strength training with me, Wing Commander Chandrasekhar Guru. I'm from Department of Sports Medicine, Armed Forces Medical College, Pune. What would we learn from this particular lecture? We discuss about principles of periodization and how different periodization methods are employed in sports, align them with the strength training principles, how we can periodize strength training using various variables, and some practical aspects in terms of periodization of strength training using use case scenarios. How do you define a successful program? A successful program is one which is structured. It must be able to stimulate adaptation. It must have adequate recovery time, because of which it leads to enhanced performance, reduced performance plateau, and reduced injury risk. The central theme of a successful program is completely dependent on principle of periodization or principle of variability. So what is periodization? Periodization is nothing but a logical, systematic process of sequencing and integrating various training methods or modalities or regimens to achieve peak performance at appropriate time points. So, this is achieved by changing the training variables, and this helps in reducing the burnout and the injury, but at the same time it also helps in optimizing the performance. So the considering the historical perspective of periodization, Leonid Matveev is called the father of periodization. He introduced these concepts in 1960. It was Tudor Bompa who translated these and enabled the American scientists to use them in the Western world, in predominantly in the field of strength and conditioning. The periodization principle follows the model of general adaptation syndrome, which is developed by Hans Sale. So this basic concept involves training, which is considered stimulus, recovery, which is required for adaptation. Too much of training leads to exhaustion, and correct load at optimum level leads to peaking of the performance. With this background, we see what is the scientific rationale. So based on this particular theory, the general adaptation syndrome, the three responses the body responds to the stimuli. This is the alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Though when you are given a stimuli, the adaptation happens as a resistance to this particular stimuli, and if there is adequate recovery time given for these adaptations to take place, it ends up in a better functional capacity, which is called as super compensation. Whereas if the recovery is low or the stimuli is more, either of this condition would result in something called as exhaustion or overtraining, which in common term is called as burnout. So periodization leverages this process in a planned and a progressive manner so that an effective training is achieved. What are the various principles used in the periodization? One is progressive overload, because any training program you need to impart this concept of progressive overload, and the training that is imparted has to be specific in terms of the energy system, in terms of the strength goal, or in terms of whichever muscle group that is being trained. But in order to achieve this, it is also important to include the principle of variation, wherein variation helps in preventing the monotony in the training as well as overuse in a particular region. So this helps in kind of achieving the training gain in a sequential and a easy or a cyclical manner. So including the principles of variation is very important, and the variation principle can be included in any of the training variables starting from frequency, intensity, the type of training, or even the modality of different trainings in terms of manipulating the volume or the progression as well. And last but not least, the important principle component of periodization is the recovery. Giving adequate recovery time in between sessions, in between training methods will help in kind of giving that adequate time for the body to adapt to the stimuli. So that is very important. If that is not given properly, then you end up in what you call as overtraining syndrome, or you may not achieve the desired end result. Hence, ensuring these principles in your training program will may help you make an effective training program, and changing the program is important. It is necessary for the growth, and recovery is also equally important for necessary adaptations to take place. So, there are various types of periodization models that have been employed over a period of time. Four main important periodization models are linear, non-linear or undulating, block periodization, and flexible or a variable periodization. Each method has its own benefits and demerits. It is employed depending on the stage of the phase of training, athlete level, or it may be depending on the sports the individual is being trained for. So moving on to the linear periodization, the name suggests it is linear in terms of gradual increase in the volume and intensity. Initially, to start with, the volume is more and gradually the intensity is increased. So the volume is reduced over a period of time and intensity is increased over a period of time. It is a very good periodization model for beginners and those who come back post rehabilitation or after a post season. So it is a good to start with linear periodization to gradually improve the gain of the training program, and it has a predictable progress. So you can change the variables in terms of volume and intensity weekly. So that's a part of linear periodization. Moving on to non-linear periodization is an undulating periodization. This type of periodization is used in elite level of athletes who have already achieved a level of adaptation in their body. So here the volume and intensities are frequently changed, maybe changed on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, and it is especially useful for athletes who have year-round competitions. So for them, it is important to vary the intensity and volume on a frequent basis for necessary adaptations to take place, and this helps in maintaining multiple different kind of fitness traits that is required for the sports to be played. The third method of model of periodization is block periodization, where the focus is mainly to develop specific kind of gain or training motor quality in blocks. So blocks become the focus. The blocks may be in terms of accumulation of a particular quality, transmutation, that is conversion or transformation, and the last is the realization of the motor quality. So each block has a specific goal and specific objective to train a particular capacity. So it helps in kind of picking the athlete at the required time, at the right time during the competition. So the focus is very narrow and can be progressed accordingly. Coming to the last method is the flexible periodization. It is more of a periodization which is done using the volume and the intensity depending on the athlete's response. So here you need to monitor the athlete's response either objectively or subjectively using heart rate methods or using rate of perceived exertion methods. Based on that, the individual's readiness is assessed and the program is instituted. So this is more of a feedback based periodization, and hence it helps in kind of reducing the injury risk. Any kind of model that you would be incorporating in your periodization, it has to adhere to a training cycle. Say Olympics, it is done every, conducted every 4 years. So for Olympic level athlete, the training cycle will be 4 years. Say you can take an example of an academic program in school, say class 4 or a class 5, everything happens annually, right? So that becomes a training cycle for the academic cycle. So you have in the academic cycle, you have various syllabus that needs to be covered during the period, and they are kind of divided based on different milestones that needs to be achieved in terms of terms, first term, second term, third term. Or you can have a quarterly based or quarterly, half yearly, and then an annual examination. The assessments are also planned according to the syllabus that is being covered, right? So accordingly, you may have weekly assessment, monthly assessment, and then you have term assessment, then you have half yearly and the final summative exams. So that's how you plan your assessment also based on the training cycle. So hence, even in sports also, you have something called as the training cycle, which is the macro cycle, further divided into lesser mesocycles and microcycle. Generally, microcycle is a week's session, is called as a microcycle. So you now, having known about the different kind of milestones and the training cycle, now it is easier to design the strength training program and fit in within the cycles. So periodization starts with planning these annual cycles and then kind of formulating the goals aligning with this cycles. So what are the variables that you use to kind of plan a gradual kind of overloading as well as to reach a specific goal? So as we discussed in the previous lecture, it is given by FIT PV. FIT is the frequency, number of sessions in a week that you will introduce. I is intensity, that is intensity is the percentage for one RM of the individual or a particular group of muscle. Then you go with the type depend, maybe a free weight, machine, or it can be whole body weight type of strength training. And the second T is the time or the session duration. P is nothing but the progression in terms of volume or intensity, and V is nothing but the volume. Volume is again expressed in terms of repetition, sets, and rest interval. So manipulating all these variables helps in kind of focusing towards the specific strength gain in terms of either strength, hypertrophy, or endurance. So how do you periodize this? So it's an important slide that I would like to draw your attention to this particular table, wherein let's see if the resistance component that we want to train is an endurance, strength endurance. You see here strength endurance, as we know, endurance is like for a prolonged period of time, over a longer duration, right? So for longer duration, obviously you don't want the intensity to be very high. So what you do is the load or the intensity is low, whereas you want a prolonged duration, right? So the volume has to be increased in terms of repetition. So repetitions are high. So that's how you can easily remember for an endurance strength endurance kind of perspective, the periodization in terms of low intensity and high volume. Whereas if you go for maximum strength for hypertrophy, for example, here you need maximum load or intensity and moderate level of repetition or maybe low, but then the main importance is in terms of the tempo or the rhythm, where you want the repetition to be done under sustained tension. So the repetition is slow so that it is sustained through the entire range of motion, and that causes hypertrophy adaptations. So that's why you need a slow tempo. Whereas if you want sports, say for example weightlifter or a boxer who need to punch fast, so here you need more of a power training. Power training is maximum amount of force in shortest period of time, right? So there the tempo has to be very fast. The load that with which you need to produce, you need a more load that needs to be as an outcome. So you need to have at least 40 to 60% of the intensity in a moderate level. Whereas the repetition, if you see, it has to be low. because if you want to do it faster with high load, then you will not be able to, the quality will not be able to sustain for longer period, right? So there you need to have low repetition in terms of volume. So that's how you periodize depending on the strength goal that is required for a particular session or a sport. So each goal requires a different strategy that needs to be incorporated in the training program. So now, knowing about the periodization in terms of specific strength goal, let's focus on the periodization periods, how you define the annual training cycle into a macro cycle, into multiple mesocycles and a microcycle. Similarly, you have the transition phases, like, right? So the competition cycle will have a preparatory phase, then followed by a pre-competitive, then you enter into a competitive phase, then you go on to a transition or a recovery phase, right? So that's how the period, the phase of training happens. So with the phase of training, how the strength training is kind of aligned, that is what this table is going to convey. Let's focus on the preparatory phase. When you start with the preparatory phase, you want the strength training to be at the initial level, where you want to develop the basic strength. If the individual is amateur, then obviously you go in for a conditioning program, then followed by a basic strength training program. Then the strength training specific to the sport should be focusing more in terms of the endurance and hypertrophy. So here you will have more of a low to moderate intensity, where you are preparing the individual and the volume is going to be high. Whereas when you go into a pre-competitive phase, in the pre-competitive phase, you will have more of focus on the strength and the power, where you wanted the individual to move more towards the sport specific strength gains. There you wanted the individual to more focus on the power, and the individual also has some kind of a basic strength quality that has been already achieved from the preparatory phase. So chances of injury risk is also reduced. Now here in this phase, how you modulate the intensity and the volume. So if you see, depending on the sports, you will have more of a higher load. Say for example power, so obviously you need to generate more power, more force, right? So it will have more high intensity, whereas the volume, if you see, it will be low, as we described previously. See, the volume will be low. When you actually end up in a competitive phase, like you are in the competitive phase, there you employ two different phenomenon called as the peaking and the tapering, which we will be discussing in detail subsequently. So peaking basically is to peak the individual or time the individual to reach a peak using certain strategy in manipulation of your load and volume, and thereafter tapering is tapering the training volume, so that you give that adequate recovery for the individual to undertake various adaptations in the body, which end up in a better functional outcome, also called as super compensation. So that is about the peaking and tapering. But then there may be sports wherein multiple competitions are there, like for example football. So there will be a season during which you will have multiple league matches. So the competition has to be planned in such a way that the peaking has to be planned along with the competition, right? There will be undulating kind of periodization. But then during the between competition phase, you also want the individual to maintain that developed qualities. You don't want to have a detraining effect. So that is the reason you also incorporate something called as maintenance strength training phase, where you use a moderate to high intensity is kept at a moderate to high, but then the volume is still kind of moderate. So it kind of helps the individual to maintain that particular strength quality that has been developed. When the competition is over, you go into something called as post season or a recovery phase, wherein you want the individual to go into active rest because of the stress that has been accrued over a period of time because of the annual training phase. So now in this phase, you again don't want the individual to entirely go into something called as detraining, or we dealt about it in the principle of training is principle of reversibility, right? So you wanted to give the training stimulus to be at the minimum, so that it doesn't end up in detraining. So that is why you have extremely low level of intensity and low level of volume during this active rest. That is why it is not passive rest, it is active rest. Some amount of activity keeps happening, stimulus is there, so that the detraining effect doesn't ensue. Having known about this, let's learn about peaking. Peaking is nothing but maximizing your strength and power during 1 to 2 weeks period only for the competition sake, and you reach that optimum performance level at the maximum point during the competition. Thing of caution is that if this lasts for a prolonged period of time, it may end up in what you call as overtraining syndrome and may also result in injuries. What is the concept of tapering? Tapering is nothing but it is seen when you reach a level of peaking and thereafter you kind of reduce the um, training volume. So that helps in kind of giving more time for the individual to adapt. The recovery time is enhanced and that helps in kind of super compensation or going to a next level of performance. So that happens in the process called as tapering. Tapering mainly cuts the volume but not really the intensity per se, and it is especially important deploy or employed in terms of just before the competition, so that you have adequate kind of recovery and then you perform better during the competition. What about periodization in team sports? The same methodology in periodization in team sports, you call the preparatory phases off season. So, during which you focus on strength and hypertrophy and basic strength, followed by the pre-competitive pre-season, you will focus more on the power and the maximum strength with accumulation of the basic strength, continuation of the basic strength. In season is the actual competitive period wherein you want them to perform to the best using the various periodization model and maintain that over the period of entire in season duration. Once the season is over, post season you want them to do an active rest wherein they will kind of maintain the basic level so that they don't enter into the detraining aspect of it. How about the strength training periodization between power sports and endurance sports? So, it may be intriguing for you. Even in endurance sports, for better performance you need strength. So, that is why it is important to incorporate strength training in both power as well as endurance type of sports people. So, in power sports you need more of explosive or power generation of maximum force in shortest possible time, right? So, there you need to include more number of strength training activities or exercises that can increase the power generation. It is emphasizing mainly on the rate of force development, and hence the sessions are really short and they are very intense, close to 85 to 100% of your 1 RM, and the rest interval in this is longer because you are targeting the ATP phosphocreatine and the anaerobic glycolysis pathway. Whereas if you come into endurance sports, in endurance sports it is more of a cyclical in nature. So, obviously the emphasis is more in terms of speed and interval training. Say for example a marathon runner, towards the end stage of the race, the individual, even though is run about say 37 kilometer, beyond that the remaining 4 to 5 kilometers the time is going to design the timing. So, that is the time when the marathoner actually races. So, that period of time where your oxidative metabolism is gradually kind of transitioning to the anaerobic method of production of energy, right? So, that is the time where if the strength training is done properly in terms of speed and interval training, you will have better results during that period. So, strength training has to be incorporated or periodized in the endurance sports as well as a form of concurrent training. Importance is lower compared to the endurance type of modalities, but then it has to be incorporated with a frequency of at least 2 to 3 sessions during the week. Here the rest interval ratio is that shorter interval period is given so that you work on the oxidative metabolism as well. The volume is kept at moderate level. How do you periodize in terms of sports rehabilitation? It has to be aligned with the tissue healing process. As accordingly, it has to be aligned with the phase of sports rehab. Importance is given in terms of quality rather than the load, and the load is gradually increased. The progression has to be done with a lot of caution, considering the physiological status of the tissue that is undergoing healing, and it is important to assess them periodically so that you have a kind of input or feedback about the status of the gain in the sports rehabilitation process. So coming back to the same case scenario, Nikhil is an amateur college athlete. He has started strength training at the college gym. He seeks your advice. As a coach, trainer, or a therapist, having some basic foundational concept idea, you explained him the program. Now, how would you periodize the strength training program considering he's a college athlete, and what are the factors that you would consider in designing the program? So, if I need to answer this particular question, I would consider that he is a young college athlete, is an amateur. Consider the athlete profile. Athlete profile would involve what is the past experience of doing strength training, how much is the kind of training age of the individual, um, what is the kind of conditioning status of the individual, what about the past injury, so that accordingly you can kind of address those aspects in your program. Next comes the sports that individual is going to play. What is the demand of the sports per se? What are the strength goal of that particular sports? Accordingly, you will have to consider the different periodization. Then you will need to have the annual training cycle per se to have an overall view about when the competition is planned and how you are going to achieve the gradual strength gain for that particular competition, and align your strength goal according to the different cycles that is there, microcycle and mesocycles. Accordingly, you can then vary your volume and intensity. So to summarize, periodization helps to prevent injury, burnout, and peak at the right time. Manipulating the variables aids in achieving the appropriate strength training goal, and monitoring is again important to have a effective training program. Aligning these strength training goals with the phase of the training and the period of training helps in kind of giving a successful outcome as well. For all those of you who are interested in further in-depth training, these are very good reference where you can go through. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind.